Greetings SOSW viewers, it is your resident Jedi Knight Luke here with the long-awaited finale discussion for the final handful of episodes of Bad Batch Season 2, and joining me is...
the always dependable Captain Henson.
Without wasting any more time, let's just dive right in, starting with Episode 13, Pabu. This episode begins in a nightclub on Coruscant. Fee and Omega are dealing with people to get an artifact. The dealers give Fee a drink, and upon finding out it's poison, the dealers surreptitiously send out a Cahoon. Hunter kills it, and the place breaks out into a fight. Tech retrieves the heroes, they're flying through hyperspace, and they have a message from Sid. We find out it's been 20 days with no contact, and Sid gives them one final warning regarding their quote-unquote mutually beneficial agreement. Fee helps the crew out by sending them to Pabu. It has a beautiful island inhabited by refugees in the middle of an ocean. After meeting Shep Hazard and his daughter Liana, the crew get a tour of the island. Much later in the evening, the crew are having dinner, and the children go out to sea. A tremor suddenly occurs due to a sea surge as Omega and Liana are returning to shore. The others are evacuating the island, and a huge wave is incoming. Hunter saves the children with the Marauder. However, the island's lower level is ruined by the wave. The next morning, the Bad Batch offer to help repair the damage, and Shep invites them to stick around. And the episode ends.
So, obvious course of action. Kind of figured that at some point, the Bad Batch would want to split off and no longer do these missions. And I would say for the most part, the episode does a pretty good job at showcasing why they would even want to stay at this new location. Not much to really say beyond that. The plot is finally getting pushed further along.
Really enjoyed the opening scene in the bar. Obviously, Sid's neglect is something that the Bad Batch is still holding against her, and rightly so. And we'll get to that a bit later on. Pabu, I just want to say now, is gorgeous. The island, the ocean, everything, just the way it looks. And the sea surge, and the way the wave is animated and things like that. Just beautiful.
Yes, this episode does a good job at further showcasing how much the animation quality has improved since the early days of TCW.
Honestly, there's not much more that can be said about this other than Omega and Liana's bond, I suppose, given what Fee says about how it's good for Omega to have company her own age.
Yes, as one can imagine, she's a child having lived with, technically they're all the same age, but, differently developed minds and all. But one can ask the question, after everything Omega has been through, can she really just have a normal childhood, or at least the rest of her childhood be normal? Would she even want that at this point?
That's actually a theme which is explored more than once in these handful of episodes about wanting a different path, so I guess we'll elaborate on that a bit more.
Yeah, TCW, at least with some of our clone characters, didn't go into a lot of detail, but the idea of what do clones do after the war ends, and this series allows us to actually see that. Of course, given the circumstances of the Empire, we can't see them try to live out peaceful lives, but at the very least, we do get a sense of what these guys can and will do.
Anything more to say, Henson?
No, fairly straightforward episode.
Let's move on. Episode 14, Tipping Point. This episode begins on the planet Balmora. Several prisoners are being transported by the Empire. They're intercepted by Echo and company in an opposing transport. The heroes free the prisoners, get off the ship, and escape. On Tantis, Crosshair is being prompted to give the location of the Bad Batch away. However, he doesn't know where they are, so they drug him with an interrogation droid. Back with Echo, Senator Chuchi is helping the clones, and he tells her about a datachron, which he knows someone who would be capable of hacking it. Back again with the Imperials, though, Crosshair frees himself from his cell, but while sending a transmission, he's knocked out by Toxin. Back on Pabu, the heroes are helping out, and Tech is instructing Omega with how to fly. Echo arrives and gives Tech the datachron for him to decrypt. Back with the enemy, Dr. Hemlock and Grand Moff Tarkin are talking about ways to deal with decommissioned clones, and the Bad Batch get Crosshair's distress signal. Back on Tantus again, Hemlock has Crosshair drugged even harder, and the episode comes to a very anticlimactic end.
So, once again, it is nice to have the plot just continuing to progress. I mean, at this point, we only have just a few more episodes left, so really just gotta keep on moving. And we do get a lot of interesting things here, like short little character moments, like Tech continuing to teach Omega how to fly, and, of course, getting the comedic angle of she's fairly reckless and he's freaking out. But, as I've said before, the character moments, the show really excels at these character moments. Even when there's no action going on, the show can just have these characters doing these more mundane activities, and it's really engaging. Characters being able to bounce off each other really well. And of course, it's always nice to see Tarkin show up. And I don't know if I ever said this with previous episodes, but rewatching these episodes for this podcast, I really like just how the show uses elements that were only briefly shown in Revenge of the Sith, like, the V-Wings, as an example. They were a ship that showed up near the end of Revenge of the Sith. We didn't get many real look at them, any real explanation on them, but based on the sound effects, you know that these are meant to be proto-TIE fighters, and here they are. Seeing them as the regular ship flown by stormtroopers. Yeah, I mean, not much to say about this, other than, again, nice to see the plot progress further and just ramping up for the finale.
As you say, Henson, great progression. And this one is actually the start of a trilogy of episodes, so we'll get to those in just a moment. Must admit, seeing Echo again, this happened a lot sooner than I thought it would have done. Great to have him back. Seeing Tarkin, very cool. My favourite moment was probably Tech teaching Omega how to fly. With what you were saying about the comedic angle? I don't know if this was meant to be a reference or not, but when Omega is going in for the nosedive, it really reminded me a lot of when Anakin does the same thing while he and Obi-Wan are chasing Zam Wesell in Attack of the Clones, which I really liked, and it totally makes sense that she would act that way. She is a child learning the ways of being a soldier in a very unconventional manner, but because she is a child, she just wants to have fun. Yeah, that's really cool seeing that, I think. Of course, we get more of Crosshair's disillusionment, and this time it's now manifesting in active rebellion, as is seen when he tries to escape. Shall we move on?
Yes.
Okay then, so moving on to episode 15, The Summit, which picks up pretty much immediately from where the previous episode left off, as the heroes devise their plan to infiltrate the enemy's stronghold and get Crosshair back. The heroes leave Pabu and Dr. Hemlock meets with Tarkin. The group make their way onto the planet's surface and make their way into the compound as the Imperial officer meeting is in session. Hemlock proposes that decommissioned clones be used as subjects for Hemlock's own experiments. The heroes pull various stunts to sneak past the enemy, and Saw Gerrera just so happens to be sneaking around, but he refuses to help the Bad Batch fight through more Imperials while Saw makes it to a hangar with his ally, and an explosion is triggered by Saw himself. The Bad Batch make it onto a rail cart, but Imperials manage to stop them.
Yeah, so, actually, I'm trying to think if I did talk about this in previous podcasts. TCW tried to showcase war as a very gray area, but wound up not doing that and instead portraying things still in a very black and white way. Republic, Jedi, good. Sith, Separatists, bad.
With very rare exceptions.
And even when we did have those exceptions, there was always an asterisk. Like, oh, Pong Krell is a traitor. He isn't just a Jedi general who's an asshole, he's a traitor. Or Barriss becomes a terrorist. You know, very rarely do we have just basically what the original multimedia project did. And so here we have a case, you know, we have Saw Gerrera show back up again. And what we get here is different characters having different viewpoints. And while Saw Gerrera is shown to be a bit more on the unhinged side of things, we can still understand where he's coming from. Unlike in TCW, where most of the time, if you were on the Republic side, you tended to be right. Having said that, again, it was nice to see Saw Gerrera again, and the action, you know, really starting to ramp up. And I do think it's interesting, and I think we also had this in his first appearance, but now we got the actor, I think, Andrew Kishino, trying to sound more like Forrest Whitaker, which I think is interesting. This is trying to do a better progression of a character than TCW did with Anakin. I'm just saying.
Shall we move swiftly on from that?
Yeah.
So, episode 16, Plan 99, which is the season finale. The episode continues seamlessly on from the summit, with the Bad Batch fighting the Imperials on their halted rail cart. Tarkin orders that air support be called in to deal with them. The air support leaves the Bad Batch's cart hanging, and Tech enacts Plan 99, sacrificing himself, and the rest of the crew end up being rammed into unconsciousness. Omega is carried back to the Marauder. She reawakens on Ord Mantell and is overcome with the pain of Tech's death. Sid is comforting Wrecker, only for Wrecker to realize Sid has sold them out to the Empire. Hemlock and his commandos force Hunter and Wrecker to surrender. Outside, Omega tries to stand up to the enemy, but she is stunned and taken captive. Hunter, Wrecker, and Echo fight their way back to the Marauder, and they vow to get Omega back. Back on Tantis, Hemlock forces Nala Se to work on the Emperor's project, or Omega, in his words, will pay the price. In a holding cell, with Crosshair tablebound, Emery Carr throws Omega through a loop. As it turns out, they're sisters, and the episode ends.
So firstly, I like the fact that we don't spend the entire episode still at that facility. You know, we spend a bit of time there just to wrap that stuff up, but then we immediately move on. I also like the fact that Wrecker is able to put two and two together that Sid did something. Like, he may not be the smartest guy in the room, but, you know, he can still pick up on these sorts of things. I am curious to see what we do with Sid moving forward, because we clearly see that she didn't want to sell him out, but she did anyway. So I'm curious to see how the Bad Batch react to seeing her again, if and when that happens. In terms of the reveal of our main scientist lady being Omega's sister, basically, I am curious to see what the hell that means, because we still haven't exactly figured out what Omega's deal is. We know she's a clone of Jango Fett, but we still have no idea why the fuck she was made. So I'm curious to see what our main scientist lady's deal is as well.
I really enjoyed this episode. Let's just get to one of the big things just right off the bat. Tech sacrificing himself. Unfortunately, I found out about this months in advance before eventually seeing this episode. It's not the first time TCW and its affiliated material has done something like this, but this is probably the boldest example of a character committing suicide, basically.
I mean, I would like to bring up that in terms of TCW, yeah, sure, we had named characters die, but none of the, main characters. It was always like, oh, here's a one-off character for this one episode. Or, oh, here's a character from one of the prequel films that was still just a background character, showed up once in an episode and then died in that very same episode or arc. Looking at the Citadel for that one. So, I want this to actually be legit. I mean, they're selling it as being legit, but I want Tech to actually be dead. Don't reveal that he survived or that, he was saved from the brink of death. Have this just be a tragic, sad moment. Doesn't get underhanded later on. Disney Star Wars has a big fucking problem with that, especially with the use of lightsabers. So just have this be just a solid moment and leave it at that. We've reached a point with the Bad Batch where they've been through so much already. I don't want anything to get walked back. Because we're probably going to get Crosshair rejoining them again. We don't need Tech doing the same thing.
So the rest of the group fight their way back. Omega's taken captive, seemingly by Scorch.
Oh, I did forget to bring this up earlier. I thought it was cool seeing Director Krennic from Rogue One in that conference. I have my issues with Rogue One, but one of us dislikes it more than the other. But, having this level of connectivity is always great. Even if it's for an entry you may not necessarily like, it's always good just to show that this is, in fact, a universe, that everything is connected. And plus, it just makes sense for him to be here. They are building the Death Star as they literally speak. Not to mention, Rogue One is like TCW. It just always gets referenced. I mean, like we got it referenced quite a few times in Rebels.
With Rebels, it makes more sense because that's much closer to Rogue One and A New Hope than Bad Batch is. Henson alluded to it. As someone who dislikes Rogue One, the reference to the Death Star, which was obviously referred to by its code name in this instance, Project Stardust, and Krennic being there, it did kind of make me roll my eyes, but it makes sense.
And I mean, you gotta give Bad Batch some credit. When it does have characters show up from the movies or previous material, 95 to 99% of the time, it makes sense. Having Krennic here makes sense. These are big-name Imperials having a conversation about what the Empire is going to be doing. Or, having Chuchi here, it makes sense to have one of the good, kind-hearted senators from TCW show up and helping the clones. We already know this character, so this just slides us into this situation fairly easily.
Yeah, even though it was brief, it was nice to see Chuchi again in this season beyond episodes 7 and 8.
Yes, and plus, I mean, the show has been very sparing with Sidious, and we haven't even touched Vader. I gotta give them credit for that. Like, we haven't touched Vader once. I think everyone can agree with the new canon, Vader has been very pushed to the forefront. Getting his own comic line, appearing in a lot of material.
3 times he's had his own comic book run in the new canon.
Not to mention all the books he's starred in and all the other appearances. The point being, it would make sense for him to show up. But if they can reel in the urge to showcase him, I will have to give them credit. Because it would be so easy to show Vader. Now, I will say this. If he shows up in one episode, fair enough. I would prefer him to not show up at all. But if it's just one episode, and they're able to explain it in a way that makes sense, okay. But let's have this Bad Batch series stand more on its own. Have Sidious show up. That makes sense, especially in his appearances so far. But let's leave Vader out of it.
To clue people in on behind the scenes, going all the way back to the episode 7 and 8 discussion, you hypothesized the idea of what if Vader was to confront Rex. And that's probably a situation where I imagine you would be okay with Vader appearing if they were to do that and found a way for it to make sense.
I would say out of all the reasons to have Vader show up here, I think that would be the most justifiable reason. I would want him to interact with Rex in some way. Because I'm trying to think if he knew Anakin was Vader in Rebels. Yeah, no, he didn't know. I don't know. I mean, then again, as the Ahsoka series showed, contradicting what we saw on screen isn't out of the realm of possibility, unfortunately. You remember the Rebels finale? I guess specifically seeing Sabine at her mural and then seeing Ahsoka the White.
Yes.
Yeah, so we get that scene in the Ahsoka series, but it's different. Like, Ahsoka isn't in those white robes and doesn't have that staff.
Oh.
Which then just raises a whole bunch of questions, but that aside, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think we would get Rex interacting with Vader. I mean, it's possible, but I feel like the only reason to do that would be to have Rex put 2 and 2 together. Or we could have a scene similar to that one EU story where Vader sees the broken remains of C-3PO on Bespin. So we could have a little humanizing moment for him, but I doubt it. If Vader were to show up, aside from meeting with Rex, I would want him to be portrayed similarly to his appearance in Jedi Fallen Order, or his big scene in Rogue One, where he is just an unstoppable monster that just no one has a chance of beating.
Heading back to the episode itself, with just one more but really key thing. Emery Carr and Omega being sisters. It was only when watching this handful of episodes again that I picked up on Emery's accent being similar to Omega's, but I didn't suspect there was any sort of relation there. So to find out that there is, I mean, talk about a shocker.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you listen to both their voices, you can tell it's the same actor.
No, it's a different actress, but the voices, upon close enough listening, are similar.
Yeah, the voices are very, very similar. She does sound like an older version of Omega.
Did you see the sibling revelation round the corner?
No, I didn't pick up on the similar voices until after. Like, watching I'll just say this, watching the season 3 episodes and then rewatching these last few episodes, I was able to pick up on the voice.
Just to be completely open here, guys, at the time of recording this, Season 3 has already begun.
If you couldn't already tell based on how late we're doing this.
So we will be discussing Season 3's first 3 episodes very, very shortly. Shall we wrap this one up, Henson?
Yes, so overall I think this was a solid batch of episodes to close off the season, and I'm really excited to go right into Season 3.
You've just taken every word out of my mouth, Henson. We shall discuss what Season 3 has brought us thus far, and where it goes beyond the episodes that have already released. We shall see. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Jedi Knight Luke with
Captain Henson.
And we have finally wrapped up Season 2 of The Bad Batch. Thank you guys ever so much for your patience. We'll be seeing you guys very soon with The Bad Batch Season 3. So, until then, may the Force be with you.
Take care.